The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rooftops of Willow Creek, casting long, golden streaks across the manicured lawns and sparkling swimming pools of the neighborhood. I leaned against the cool metal railing of my backyard deck, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, and watched my children splash in the pool. The water shimmered like liquid sapphire, reflecting the last rays of sunlight, and for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. But perfection, I knew, in this neighborhood, was fragile. The HOA had been nothing but a quiet hum in the background for years, an administrative formality I paid little attention to. That was until Karen moved in. HOA Karen, as everyone in the neighborhood quietly called her, had an uncanny knack for turning minor infractions into full-blown crises. A leaf on the wrong side of the fence, a slightly crooked mailbox, a garden gnome she didn't approve of. Nothing escaped her meticulous gaze. I tried to avoid her, to steer clear of confrontation, but it seemed inevitable that sooner or later she would target me. It all started last Tuesday. I was hosting a small pool party for the kids and their friends. The smell of chlorine mingled with the faint aroma of barbecue from a neighbor's yard, and laughter echoed off the walls of our subdivision. I was watching my youngest cannonball into the pool for the fourth time in 5 minutes when I noticed her, Karen. She was standing at the edge of my yard, arms crossed, sunglasses perched precariously on her nose, and that tight-lipped expression that made it clear she was about to unleash some passive-aggressive commentary. I forced a smile, hoping she'd just wave and go. "Hey, Karen," I called. "Hello," she said, her voice clipped. "I noticed you didn't send an invite for your little gathering." I chuckled nervously. "It's just a few kids from the cul-de-sac, nothing big." Her eyes narrowed. "I see. Well, I also noticed that you haven't submitted a pool access form for HOA members." She leaned in, lowering her voice like she was about to divulge some grave secret. "I would like to use the pool sometimes. It's my right, after all." I felt the familiar swell of irritation in my chest. There was a rule about pool access for HOA members, yes, but it was mostly a formality. And after the last incident with her over the mailbox, I had no desire to accommodate her whims. I took a deep breath, smiling in a way that masked my frustration. "Karen, I'm sorry, but this is a private event. The pool's just for my kids and their friends today." She huffed, the sound like steam escaping a kettle. "I don't appreciate being excluded. I'll be contacting the HOA board about this." I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, but inside I was tense. "Feel free to do so. I've followed all the rules." That should have been the end of it, but Karen had a way of taking minor slights personally. Later that evening, as the kids were drying off and I was stacking chairs by the patio, I saw a black SUV slowly pull up to the entrance of my driveway. 2 officers stepped out, badges glinting in the fading sunlight. My stomach dropped. "Good evening, ma'am," one of them said. "We received a call regarding restricted pool access at this property." I blinked, searching their faces for a clue as to whether this was some kind of misunderstanding. "Restricted pool access?" I asked, my voice tight. "I'm sorry, officers, but I didn't call anyone. This is my private property." The other officer nodded. "We understand, ma'am. We just need to clarify a few things." There was a complaint, and that's when I realized Karen had escalated things far beyond what I had imagined. The polite warnings, the letters, the passive-aggressive notes, they had all been a prelude. She had called the police over a pool party. My jaw tightened, but I forced calm. "I see," I said. "Please, ask whatever you need." They went through the motions, checking our pool permits, talking to the kids' parents who had stayed nearby, and eventually concluded that everything was in order. As the officers left, the tension in the yard seemed to lift, but only slightly. My heart was still racing, and I knew this wasn't over. Karen didn't even bother to come by after that. I imagined her standing by her window, arms crossed, plotting the next move. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of her smug expression haunted me, the kind that said, "I'll get you next time." I realized that if I didn't plan carefully, she would continue to make my life miserable. And that's when the idea came to me. It wasn't about revenge at first. It was about strategy, about setting boundaries that even Karen couldn't ignore. I began thinking about the pool, our property, and the ways I could assert control without breaking any laws. The pool, after all, was mine. The backyard, my sanctuary. And if someone wanted to treat it like a battleground, I had to be prepared. Over the next few days, I devised a plan that was simple in concept but powerful in impact. I wouldn't confront her directly, wouldn't escalate to arguments or petty HOA letters. Instead, I would make it unmistakably clear that our home, our pool, and our rules would be respected. I started small, subtle changes around the pool, minor adjustments that Karen would notice without understanding the full picture. A new lock on the gate, discreet cameras that blended into the landscaping, and carefully planned signs about private property. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I was setting the stage, ensuring that she would see that any further intrusion or complaints would be met with measured, undeniable evidence. Meanwhile, I kept the kids' pool time normal, fun, and carefree. Laughter echoed through the yard as if nothing had changed. But underneath, I felt a growing sense of anticipation, a controlled thrill at the thought of what would happen when Karen realized she had no leverage. By Friday, the tension had built to a point where it was almost palpable. I watched from the kitchen window as Karen's car slowly drove past, her gaze lingering a fraction too long on our backyard. I knew she was plotting, imagining her list of grievances growing with each visit. But this time I was ready. The next day, I invited a few neighbors over for a barbecue. Not a pool party, just a casual weekend gathering. The smell of grilled burgers and roasted corn filled the air, and the yard was alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and the occasional bark from our dog. Karen drove past once, twice, but didn't stop. I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that her obsession with control would ultimately be her undoing. By Saturday evening, I had completed the final touches to my plan. Everything was in place, every detail meticulously thought out. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and felt a rare sense of calm. The next time Karen tried to assert herself, she would see that the situation had shifted. She had no idea what was waiting. The pool glimmered under the last light of day, serene and untouchable, a symbol of both joy and power. And as I sipped my tea, I couldn't help but smile at the thought that, for the first time, I was in control. Saturday night descended on Willow Creek like a velvet curtain, softening the edges of the manicured lawns and muted chatter of the neighborhood. But while the world seemed calm, inside my house, tension coiled like a spring ready to snap. Karen had not yet acted, but I could sense her brewing frustration with every passing hour. Her obsession with the pool, with control, was a storm I could feel approaching, slow, inevitable, and dangerous. Sunday morning, I was up early, checking the cameras I had installed near the pool gates and along the backyard fence. They were discreet, just enough to capture movement without drawing attention. The footage from the previous days showed Karen driving past repeatedly, sometimes slowing, sometimes stopping entirely, and sometimes glancing in our direction from her car window. Her obsession was escalating, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried something drastic. I sipped my coffee, trying to calm the unease in my chest. The children were still asleep, their laughter absent from the quiet house. And for the first time in days, the backyard seemed like an empty stage waiting for the actors to arrive. I had to be ready, and that meant anticipating Karen's every possible move. By mid-morning, the first signs appeared. A note pinned to the HOA bulletin board, casually slipped under my door, complained about restricted access and unfair treatment of community members. Karen's handwriting was precise, every letter a tiny dagger aimed at me. I read it carefully, keeping my expression neutral. I didn't need to respond immediately. Every reaction I had now would feed into her narrative of conflict. I spent the day prepping the backyard, not just for the children, but for the inevitable confrontation. I adjusted the poolside furniture, ensuring clear sight lines from the cameras. I tested the gate locks and double-checked that everything was functioning. Even the smallest detail mattered. Karen had underestimated me before, but she wouldn't again. The tension in the air thickened as the afternoon approached. The kids begged to go swimming, and I allowed it, but with new rules in place. Only friends I personally invited, no unsupervised access, and a firm boundary that no outside guests could enter without explicit permission. Every cannonball, every splash, felt like a statement, a quiet declaration of sovereignty over our space. Then, just as the sun began to tilt toward the horizon, I saw her. Karen had parked at the corner of the cul-de-sac, pretending to read a magazine while casting furtive glances toward our yard. She wasn't subtle. Her glare burned like sunlight reflecting off the water, and I knew she was searching for a moment to assert control. I called the children inside, their shrieks fading reluctantly, and closed the gate behind them. Karen's eyes followed my every move, and I could feel her frustration mounting. She had no idea I had anticipated her every tactic. The following hour was a tense chess match. Karen circled the neighborhood in her SUV, slowing down near other houses, making small phone calls, undoubtedly to the HOA, no doubt crafting another complaint. I watched from the window, pretending to water the plants, calm as a statue, all the while my heart thumping in rhythm with the tension outside. Then came the call. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, and when I answered, a clipped voice delivered news I had expected. "Ma'am, this is Officer Reynolds. We received another complaint regarding restricted pool access. The caller insists on visiting immediately to inspect." I took a slow breath. "Officer, as I mentioned before, this is private property. All regulations are being followed. There is no inspection required." "I understand, ma'am," the officer replied, though I could sense his uncertainty. However, the caller is persistent. "I just wanted to make sure you're aware." I hung up and stared at the phone, a slow smile creeping across my face. Karen was relentless, but her own persistence was predictable. Every move she made could be anticipated. Every call, every note, every glare from across the street only confirmed she was walking straight into a trap I had carefully laid. By evening, the intensity had reached its peak. Karen's SUV appeared at the end of the driveway again, this time staying parked longer, her body language rigid and tense. I called the kids inside once more, telling them it was too late for swimming. They grumbled, but I could see the trust in their eyes. They knew something was different this time. Karen approached the fence, knocking politely at first. I opened the window just enough to speak without stepping outside. "Good evening," she said, forcing a friendly tone. "I just wanted to discuss the pool situation. Surely, there's a way to resolve this amicably." I leaned casually against the windowsill. "Karen, I've made my position clear. The pool is private, and my kid's safety comes first. That hasn't changed." Her eyes flashed, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. "I think you're being unreasonable. I'm a member of the HOA. This is—" I cut her off gently but firmly. "And as a neighbor, I respect your role. But this is our home, our rules, and our space. Any further complaints will be handled with the documentation we have." Her mouth opened, perhaps to argue, perhaps to threaten, but I didn't give her the chance. I closed the window with a soft click. She stood frozen for a moment, and then, without a word, returned to her SUV. I exhaled slowly, the first real breath I had taken all day. The stakes had risen higher than ever, and yet, for the first time, I felt a strange exhilaration. The tension was no longer just about defense. It was about taking control of a situation that had been festering for too long. That night, I reviewed the security footage again, noting every glance, every pause, every step Karen had taken. Patterns emerged, predictable patterns, and I realized that the next day, I could finally turn the tables. By Monday morning, the entire neighborhood seemed to sense the unspoken tension. Whispers floated over the fences, neighbors glanced curiously at our yard, and even the HOA board seemed unusually quiet. Karen had escalated far enough that it was no longer just personal. It had become a spectacle, a story whispered behind closed doors. I moved through the day with a calm that belied the storm brewing just beyond the fence. My plan was no longer just defensive, it was proactive. I had anticipated her complaints, her surveillance, her obsession. And now, I was ready to deliver a subtle, undeniable lesson that would leave her stunned. The pool, calm and reflective, waited silently for the next act. And as I prepared, a thrill coursed through me. Karen had no idea what I had prepared. She thought she was in control. But the reality was that everything had shifted, and soon she would see it. Tuesday morning arrived with a golden calm that belied the storm of tension simmering in Willow Creek. I could feel it the moment I stepped outside. The air seemed charged, electric, as though the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. The kids were already clamoring by the pool, oblivious to the drama that had been unfolding for days. I smiled at them, masking the nerves fluttering in my stomach. Today would be the day. Karen's black SUV appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac just as I had anticipated, engine idling, her posture rigid and deliberate. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, as if prepared to document some injustice. I didn't need to open the window to know her gaze was fixed on me. She thought she had me cornered, thought she was about to assert her authority and expose my rule-breaking. But she had walked straight into the snare I had set. I met her eyes calmly. "Good morning, Karen," I said, voice casual, serene, like a still lake. She narrowed her eyes. "I'm here to make sure the HOA guidelines are being followed. You've restricted access, and that's unacceptable." I gestured toward the pool. "You're welcome to watch, but access is still restricted." "That hasn't changed." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "I've already spoken with the board. If you continue to deny me access, there will be consequences." I tilted my head, smiling faintly. "Of course I understand. But I have something I'd like to show you first." Her confusion was brief. Before she could respond, I pressed a button on my phone. Instantly, a series of discrete floodlights illuminated the perimeter of the pool and backyard, highlighting every gate, every fence line, every camera in a way that made the property look both secure and intentionally impenetrable. She blinked, caught off guard, her clipboard trembling slightly in her hands. "Surprised?" I asked lightly. "All documentation, every camera, every lock, completely legal, fully compliant. Everything is visible and recorded. Your every approach has been documented for weeks." Her face went pale. You've been recording me?" I nodded. "Of course. Not to invade privacy, but to protect my property and my children. You've been persistent, and I've kept a log, timestamps, movements, even photos of your visits." Karen's hand shook as she flipped open her clipboard. I didn't realize." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Let me finish. Every complaint, every call to the HOA, every minor infraction you imagined, it's all on record. And here's the thing. My family's safety comes first. You've escalated this unnecessarily, and yet I've remained calm, compliant, and legal every step of the way." Her lips parted, but no words came. The arrogance that had fueled her for days was beginning to crumble. I continued, my tone soft but unyielding. "I've even prepared a notice for the HOA board. It details every action you've taken, every complaint filed, and includes evidence that none of my decisions violate community guidelines. You see, Karen, this is a neighborhood built on rules and respect goes both ways." She swallowed hard, glancing around, realizing that neighbors on their porches were now watching. A few kids rode bikes past, curious, while I kept my composure, radiating calm authority. The power had shifted. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said, voice cracking. I smiled, not in triumph, but in the quiet certainty of justice. "Intentions matter, Karen, but actions speak louder. And your actions have caused unnecessary stress for my family. We are still welcoming neighbors, but there are boundaries. Clear boundaries." Her eyes filled with the beginnings of tears, frustration, and a dawning recognition that her control had evaporated. The clipboard slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud on the grass. She looked around helplessly, realizing the crowd of neighbors, the security cameras, and the evidence in my hands made any further confrontation futile. For the first time, she was forced to see that her obsession with authority and control had blinded her to reality. And as she turned and walked back toward her SUV, defeated, I felt a mix of relief and triumph. Not gloating, just the calm satisfaction of having stood my ground and ensured my family's sanctuary remained intact. I spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet reflection, watching my children splash in the pool once more, carefree and happy. Karen never returned that day, and the following morning, the neighborhood seemed to exhale collectively. Even the HOA board was quieter, aware now of the balance of power and the consequences of unnecessary escalation. By midweek, Karen's attempts at complaints had stopped. The cameras, the locks, and the documented evidence served as a subtle but powerful deterrent. Every time she drove past, she no longer glared but kept her distance, a silent acknowledgement that her authority had limits. Limits I had made abundantly clear. That evening, I hosted a small barbecue, not a spectacle, not a warning, just family, neighbors, and the simple joy of ordinary life. Laughter echoed across the yard. The scent of grilled food mingled with the warm night air, and the pool shimmered under the soft glow of strategically placed lights. It was a celebration not just of victory over Karen's intrusion, but of reclaiming the peace and joy that had been threatened. I couldn't help but smile at the thought that Karen, meticulous, controlling, and relentless, had finally met a boundary she couldn't cross. Not through confrontation or conflict, but through preparation, foresight, and quiet resolve. As night fell, I stood by the pool one last time, reflecting on the past week. The tension, the fear, the frustration, all of it had culminated in a moment of quiet triumph. My family's safety, our peace, and our dignity were intact. And Karen, for all her schemes, had no idea what we had prepared, not out of malice, but out of the necessity to protect what mattered most. The pool was calm, reflecting the moonlight, the neighborhood finally at rest. I knew challenges would come again, in life, in the neighborhood, in subtle conflicts like this one. But for now, I had learned the power of patience, strategy, and resilience. Karen had been stopped, not by confrontation alone, but by foresight, planning, and a deep understanding of what truly mattered. And as I turned to head inside, I realized that the real victory wasn't in showing her who was right or wrong. It was in knowing that boundaries had been set, respect had been earned, and peace had been restored. The tension that had gripped the week dissolved, leaving only a quiet, glowing sense of control and calm. By Thursday morning, Willow Creek had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, as if the past week's tension had been a distant storm now past. But for me, the sense of calm carried a quiet victory. The pool sparkled in the sunlight, the kids laughed freely without fear of interruption, and the backyard felt like the sanctuary it had always been meant to be. Karen, surprisingly, had not appeared. No SUV at the corner of the cul-de-sac, no furtive glances through the windows, no frantic notes slipped under the door. It was almost eerie, like the neighborhood itself had exhaled, relieved that the conflict had reached its natural conclusion. My children ran around the yard, chasing our golden retriever, their joyful screams bouncing off the fences. Watching them, I realized that this story wasn't just about a pool, or rules, or HOA disputes. It was about protecting what mattered: family, home, and peace of mind. I spent the morning tidying the backyard, straightening chairs, and wiping down tables. The air smelled faintly of chlorine and cut grass, a comforting scent that reminded me of lazy summer afternoons. As I worked, neighbors began to filter past, some waving, others stopping to chat. There were subtle acknowledgments in their smiles, the quiet recognition that I had handled the situation with poise and integrity. One neighbor, Mrs. Patel from 2 doors down, approached with a tray of freshly baked cookies. "You handled that so well," she said softly, glancing toward the pool. "I've never seen Karen so flustered. You've really set an example." I smiled, taking a cookie. "Thank you, Mrs. Patel. It was more about keeping our home safe than anything else. Honestly, I just wanted the kids to have a peaceful place to play." Across the yard, my eldest was building a small ramp for the dog to leap into the shallow end of the pool. I watched them, feeling the weight of the past week lift. The conflict with Karen had been draining, but it had also been illuminating. It reminded me how important it was to stand firm, to plan carefully, and to protect what you love without losing sight of civility. Later that afternoon, The HOA board sent an official notice acknowledging the resolution of the complaints and confirming that all pool rules and regulations had been followed. It was polite, formal, and neutral, the kind of document that officially recognized that Karen's claims had no merit. Reading it, I felt a subtle surge of satisfaction, not from gloating, but from knowing that the truth had been preserved. The neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. Children rode bikes along the sidewalks, sprinklers hissed in the late afternoon heat, and neighbors waved as they passed. Karen's absence was noticeable, but not oppressive. It was clear she had retreated, realizing that her obsession with control had been met with measured resistance, and that further attempts would be futile. That evening, I gathered the family for a quiet dinner on the deck. The sun set in streaks of pink and gold, casting long shadows over the yard. My children chattered about school, friends, and weekend plans, completely unaware of the silent drama that had unfolded just beyond the fences. I listened, sipping a glass of iced tea, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. The pool, the backyard, and the home we had worked so hard to maintain were safe. Our boundaries had been respected. As night fell, I walked to the edge of the pool, barefoot on the cool stone tiles. The water mirrored the moon and stars, still and glistening. I reflected on the past week, the fear, the frustration, the planning, and finally, the triumph. Karen had tested me, challenged my patience and my resolve, but in the end, foresight and calm authority had prevailed. It wasn't just about a pool. It was about standing your ground with integrity, about using strategy rather than anger, and about protecting the people and things you care about most. That lesson, I knew, would remain far longer than any conflict with an overzealous HOA member. The next morning, life in Willow Creek felt lighter. Neighbors greeted each other with easy smiles. The scent of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air, and the children returned to the pool without a hint of hesitation. Karen had quietly withdrawn, perhaps plotting her next move somewhere far from our view, but it no longer mattered. The lines had been drawn, and they were respected. As I settled into a chair by the pool, watching my family laugh and play under the warm sun, I realized that the real victory wasn't just in having outmaneuvered Karen. It was in reclaiming peace. The pool, once a point of conflict, had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder that boundaries, when defended with patience and integrity, can create not only safety but also freedom. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood seemed to change subtly. There was a newfound respect among the neighbors, a quiet acknowledgement that some disputes were better handled with calm resolve rather than confrontation. Karen, for her part, made no further appearances, and the HOA seemed more cautious about overstepping boundaries. Life returned to its rhythm. The children splashed in the pool, the barbecue grill smoked gently in the late afternoon sun, and laughter echoed across the fences. Every so often, I would glance at the corner where Karen's SUV once lingered, and a small, satisfied smile would play across my lips. She had underestimated what we were capable of, and in doing so, had reminded me of the power of careful planning, measured action, and standing firm in the face of unnecessary conflict. As twilight deepened into night, I looked around the backyard one last time. The water glimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the stars above, serene and untouchable. This home, this sanctuary, was ours, defended with quiet strategy, not aggression, and now fully reclaimed. And in that moment, I realized something profound. It wasn't just about keeping an overzealous neighbor at bay. It was about learning the value of patience, the strength in foresight, and the quiet power of protecting what truly matters. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely at peace. The neighborhood slept under a calm sky, the pool shimmering softly, the world quiet and still. And in that silence, I knew that boundaries had been set, respect had been earned, and life, unshaken, resilient, and free, continued. If you enjoyed this intense story, smash that like button and subscribe for more gripping, cinematic tales. Don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss the next thriller. Your support keeps these stories coming.